The chemistry of seed oils was so misunderstood in standard medicine. This substance explains probably 80 to 90% of all chronic disease. Once you've gotten your brain functioning right and your metabolism is fixed, you don't like processed food. I can have a Dorito and I'm like, yeah, I can see why people might like it, but it is not delicious and I don't want another one.
I got into veganism and that was the worst health of my life. And that's when someone introduced me to Weston Price. And I was like, oh, this makes perfect sense because I grew up on a cattle ranch.
Yeah, Weston Price is the antidote to a lot of people's little dabblings with veganism, that's for sure. People who have lower cholesterol are universally sicker across the board and die sooner of horrible things, dementia, infectious diseases, and cancer. And people who have higher cholesterol live longer. So do we need to take a statin? I say this a lot and I really mean it, and it sounds a little crazy. We don't need more research. We need better food.
Hey, welcome everybody to Unreasonable Health. Today, I've got someone whom I'm a big fan of, was introduced to me by Joe Polish, and she's written a book that has changed thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of lives. She wrote a book called Dark Nutrition, and her latest book, Dark Calories, you may have heard me talk about it on the show. In the last few months, I was just blown away by the amount of research and the depth of her understanding. But my guest is none other than Dr. Cate Shanahan. So, Dr. Cate, welcome.
Thank you so much for the nice words you just said about my book and having me on your show.
Man, it's so good to have you here because not only are you a medical doctor, but you've also shaped the best parts of today's food and health landscapes, but you go to the root cause of what's really getting at, things like metabolic disease and diabetes. And that's what these PUFAs, or the polyunsaturated fatty acids, or what we're going to talk about are the hateful eight. The hateful eight is where you're going to learn about some of these seed oils that may be in the foods you're eating today, and they may be causing a lot of inflammation, a lot of brain fog, and they're going to shorten your life. And so I think you'll have a pretty compelling reason to get off of those and start reading labels in a whole new way. Dr. Cate, her science-backed diet advice has inspired food entrepreneurs to make billions, including bone broth, live culture ferments, and seed oil-free business empires like Primal Kitchen and Bulletproof Brands, which we all love. As a family physician, she has personally worked one-on-one with thousands of patients to improve energy metabolism, reduce fatigue, reduce cellular inflammation and organ dysfunction. And she's also worked with some really amazing professional athletes, including legends like Kobe Bryant, Aaron Judge, Kyle Lowry, and Dwight Howard. Holy cow. And through her works and influence, she's helped millions escape the vicious cycle of sickness and drug dependence. So, Cate, welcome to the show. So good to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to meet your audience.
They're the coolest people on the planet. And I'm sure they're excited to meet you in this format. So if you look at Dark Calories, you've done a lot of things with Dark Nutrition. How come you transitioned over to Dark Calories, and what would you say the biggest differences between the first book you wrote, which was over a decade ago, versus what you know now?
Yeah, so the first book is called Deep Nutrition.
Oh, excuse me, Deep Nutrition.
No, that's fine.
Misspoke. I knew it was
totally
deep.
Fine. Yeah, right. I even say things myself the wrong way. Like this latest book is Dark Calories, and sometimes I'll say Deep Calories. So
good,
totally understandable. But yeah, so this has been such a huge journey for me. And it started when I was a little girl. I really wanted to be able to heal people the way my daddy did, because he was a doctor. And, I read your bio, and I read how you were in pre-med, right?
Mm-hmm. At the University of Utah. Yeah, I just wanted to go into conventional medical school.
And there you learned, like, gosh, I just don't like this approach, right? Because probably you felt like it wasn't root cause approach.
That's it. Well, it didn't work for me, and no one had answers for my health.
Right. So I skipped pre-med. I was going to be an engineer because even though I always wanted to be a doctor, my dad talked me out of it. So I ended up not doing pre-med. I ended up doing, I was going to be an engineer, and then I wanted to be a genetic engineer. So I took a lot of biology courses and chemistry courses, and went actually to Cornell to try and design bacteria that could digest plastic. And this was in the 1980s, right? Like, because at the time we did not have the problems that we do today, but already plastic, like the thing then was the disposable baby diapers. I don't know if you're old enough to remember all of that, but
Oh, yeah.
but so I wanted to do something about that. And long story short, we were a long way from designing microbes, and I was too impatient. And I was like, I just always wanted to be a doctor. So I went to medical school. The reason I'm saying this is I bypassed all that. I did not really know much about what doctors learn. I just knew that they made people, they alleviated fear. They were able to diagnose cool stuff, and they knew a whole lot about the human body, which I thought was an amazing, just miraculous. I just loved biology and our biology. So I didn't know that we don't get into the root causes. And I found out the hard way after actually going to medical school and being a doctor, and then going through the rest of my training in family medicine and never getting really what I wanted out of my training, which was, why do people have hypertension? Why did my real interest was as an athlete, I was always getting tendinitis and bursitis and recurring injuries, and not, other people on the team did not have my problems. And what was different about me? I wanted to find out what was the root cause, because I believed exercise was medicine, right? And that was something I wanted to be able to more people to engage in. So I really was interested in that, but no, didn't get that root cause either. So by the time I graduated, I was just kind of a sad-ish in a way, that all I could do was pass out drugs, right? Like, it was the exact thing that you wanted to avoid.
Exactly.
I bet. But so when I got sicker myself, I developed a knee problem that was different than anything else I'd ever had. And nothing helped. I went through surgery. I went through multiple specialists, MRIs, every test that could be thrown at me. I went to a Hawaiian kahuna. I mean, I tried everything. I tried Eastern, Western. I tried supplements. Nothing helped. And so finally, I turned to nutrition. And it was kind of not easy for me to do that, because I assumed that because I went to medical school and I had nutrition courses there, and I learned what dietitians learn. Dietitians are the folks in the medical system who specialize in food and health. I learned everything that they learned. And I was like, well, how could there be anything more? So that's why I was sort of reluctant to dive into the subject. But I was so injured, I literally had nothing to do with my time. And my husband sent me this, or handed me this book called Spontaneous Healing, where I first encountered the idea that I was eating a lot of vegetable oil. And in Spontaneous Healing, Andrew Weil, who's the author there, he's kind of a father. He's a huge guru of supplements. Awesome. And, he's very well respected. But he was saying how, these are essential fatty acids and are important for our health. And so I at first thought they would help me, right? But then I quickly realized something else was going on that was really, really important. And this is why I've written the book Dark Calories 20 years later. Because what I realized was that the chemistry of seed oils was so misunderstood in standard medicine, and it was so potentially dangerous that I thought it was the answer to some of these root causes that medical science had no other explanation for. And so I just dove into the research and I started finding, yes, 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 the answers are here. This substance explains probably 80 to 90% of all chronic disease. And that was so profound and important and exciting to me because it gave me a handle on the lever by which I could actually do what I dreamed of doing as a little girl, which is getting the root cause and, alleviating not just worry, not just giving people the diagnoses, but also alleviating suffering and really healing people.
Right. Well, it's interesting because did you read any of Weston Price's work, or I don't know if you dove into like some of the thinking royally? Like I was big in standard process, and the thing I loved about Chinese medicine as well is you ate foods based on the seasons, and you also, if you had imbalances in your kidneys, then you would eat root vegetables, and if you had issues in your spleen, then there's like you want to eat easily digested foods, for example. So it was all very holistic, but on my Western training side, we were getting taught the same thing you were, which is from the nutritionists and dietitians who were trained by the cardiology association, or you look at the diabetic association. If you want to stay diabetic, then just follow the American Diabetic Association's guidelines. You'll completely stay that way. So now you've unpacked this, you've realized, okay, I found the root cause. What happened to your knee? How did it, I'm imagining you did something to transform your own health in this journey.
Yeah. So, well, like what I had was kind of a medical mystery. It's actually a very serious virus that it's like a neurotropic virus. It moves around in the nervous system. It can jump over to joint tissue. It can jump into your bone marrow. It's a very aggressive, nasty virus. And there's so few people that actually ever had what I had and even survived that there's not much about it in the medical literature. But so when I changed my diet, I did get better. It was slow, but I did get better. And I was able to be the kind of close to the athlete that I was in high school. So it fixed that problem, at least temporarily, right? Like these viruses, they thrive on stress. I have had too much stress in my life. And so it has now come back and it's making it hard for me to, get around, but I'm not dead. And literally I've had, doctors tell me that like, you can't have that because, you should be in the hospital. So, but what other than the diet has done so many other things for me other than like save my life and keep me alive. It also has given me, I think, like 30% more brain function, more brain power. I did not realize this early on in my research. I didn't realize, when I wrote Deep Nutrition, so I first had this issue in 2002, just to give you the timeline here. So we're talking about 22 years ago, and we were talking about 22 years of different sorts of research and what I think are just profoundly important discoveries. So back then, I was focused on inflammation and inflammatory diseases and oxidation and oxidative stress. And I didn't quite put it together with energy until I wrote my I did the research much earlier, but my 2017 book, which I happen to have right here,
Nice.
called The Fat Burn Fix.
Yeah.
There I talk about how these oils affect our energy and our brain energy specifically. And so I did not know this, but my whole life, my very personality had been impaired by lack of energy in my brain. And so what do I mean by that? That's kind of an abstract thing to say, right? I mean, like I would be in a bad mood when I shouldn't be, right? And that would change my relationships. That would I would be exhausted after working all day with patients. I had an extremely busy practice. I would come home and I would be so mentally drained that I could not have a pleasant conversation with my husband because he would just ask me the simple question, well, how was your day? What happened? And boom, everything was gone from my head. I couldn't remember for the life of me a single thing that had happened to talk about and just have like that normal kind of, husband wife conversation. So that was like one of the more profound things that I continued to learn. And in the Fat Burn Fix, I talk about how low brain energy makes you gain weight. And then, I still kept on even learning more stuff. And so if you read through the Dark Calories, you might remember how I talk about there, how low brain energy makes you crave sugar.
Yep.
And junk food. And so, as we're trying to help people recover, help people eat healthy, one of the things that we hear in conversation all the time is that ultra processed food is hyper palatable. Like as if there's all these flavors that food scientists have come up with that are superior to what nature makes. And this is what I'm personally offended by that, because first of all, there's nothing better than what is more delicious than a perfectly cooked steak with like a really great reduction sauce and caramelized onions and some mushrooms, mushroom sauce there too, with mushroom cream sauce. I can't think of anything better. I mean,
Right.
I have meal after meal of just regular food where I'm like, this is the best meal anyone could have. So,
And by regular, you just mean like food without a bunch of processing.
right, it's just food that's cooked.
Tastes so good. Go to Europe and you'll experience that. You mentioned that in your book too. Just even the
Yes.
way you can bring in some pastas occasionally, and some of those European, the way they have protected their grains and their foods, it tastes so much better.
Yes, they respected the ingredient. I did, you asked earlier, do I know about Weston Price? Absolutely. Yeah. He was foundational in my thinking because he opened my eyes up to what I was suspecting was true, which was that we'd been lied to about fat. We'd been lied to that saturated fat was unhealthy. And the flip side of that is we'd been lied to that these oils that I was discovering discovering science showing that they were definitely not healthy. So reading Weston Price, that was like the biggest validation to what I had discovered and wanted to be able to continue to share with my patients. Like I take my diet advice very personally, and I wasn't going to give them the advice just because, my little scientific theories suggested it. I needed more evidence. So Weston Price was one big body of evidence. I found a whole lot more, but
Sure.
We're just what I'm getting at here is the misinformation around diet and health goes so deep that even our understanding of what ultra processed food is and why we're eating it is wrong. Like I was saying, people talk about the reason that we're eating it is because it tastes better than regular food. But the real reason we're eating it is because we need it for energy. We need that fast energy. And processed food is full of refined carbs, refined sugars that give us fast energy. The refined oils give us fast energy. The seed oils can give our cells energy in a way that regular fats can't. But there's a price, and the price is inflammation and disease. So that's why we're addicted to processed food. And the whole conversation around it has not caught up yet with what I talk about in Dark Calories, because they're still talking about it like, well, you just have to say no to this delicious stuff, right? And that is wrong. What I'm saying is you think it's tastier than it is because it's giving you energy, and your brain is telling you that you crave this thing because your brain is smart and it knows it gets energy when you eat this stuff. But when you compare once you get rid of that brain disorder, that metabolic disorder that's causing your brain to be needing energy from sugar, needing energy from processed food, not being able to burn your body fat, that is a metabolic problem that causes brain changes that drive us to processed food. Once you fix those brain changes, you no longer crave processed food, and instead you start craving real food. And you realize just how much better it tastes, because once you've gone through this transformation, once you've gotten your brain functioning right and your metabolism is fixed, you don't like processed food. Like, you can I can have a Dorito and I'm like, yeah, I can see why people might like it, but it is not delicious, and I don't want another one.
Yeah, well, the processed food, it tastes fake. I mean, it's
Yes.
once you get away from it and you're like, how do people eat that? And that's just from the taste perspective. But then you look at that energy deficit that you end up in, and it's no wonder why we have so many kids who are, suicidal. They don't know, they don't know their sex. They have this misdirection in life. They don't make friends. They're lonely. It's like, man, we have poisoned our population. The Americans have been poisoned from your estimates. I guess it was Ansel Keys, Dwight Eisenhower administration is probably where things shifted the most dramatically. Because one of the things I was most impressed with in your work is the amount of detail you layered in, where you showed the food industry, but also where the drug industry and the pharmaceutical industry comes in, and then it's follow the money, and you can see kind of where the propaganda is. But the interesting thing that's going on right now with RFK is now we have someone who is in a position of authority, and hopefully he'll make some big changes in the health policy in the United States. But he's showing the difference in Fruit Loops, for example. I don't know if you've seen that video. He says, here's what's in Fruit Loops in Canada. And Canada doesn't have nearly as strict of policies as Europe does. And here's what's in Fruit Loops in the United States. And it's just like, it's baffling. Why are we putting all these chemicals in the food? But in your research, maybe you could uncover kind of what the root cause is and how we got to where we are with our food system today.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, we need to put chemicals in there because there's no flavor in the refined ingredients. So let's talk starting with the seed oils, right? The seed oils are neutral flavored, meaning no, they don't have flavor.
Like Crisco, like you mentioned, Crisco was a healthy alternative to bacon fat and lard. I was like, oh, that's crazy.
Well, yeah, that's what we were told, right? It's actually
it's not. Yeah, not. Don't misquote me, people.
But yeah, so when you look at our food supply. So I analyzed our food supply, and I write about this in all of my books. Actually, we are eating basically 3 ingredients. We're eating refined seed oils. That's about 30% of everybody's daily calories. And the seed oils, that are like the Hateful 8, they combine they're all about the same nutritionally. And collectively, the seed oils are the single largest source of calories in our food supply. And they have no flavor.
Largest source.
Yes, the single largest source.
I didn't realize that. That is ridiculous. Okay.
Today we are eating about 60 pounds per person on average. Just 20 years ago, that was half. That was 30 pounds per day. So that's a third of our daily calories. And then the other things that we're eating are the refined flours. White flour constitutes about 22% of everybody's daily calories. And then the refined and added sugars, including all forms of added sugars, like fruit juice and it's not really juice, it's mostly just sugar. But that's 11%.
Wow.
So just the carb ingredients and the oil ingredients are a huge portion of our daily calories. Those are just single ingredients, really: white flour, added sugars, and these refined oils. And how much nutrition do they have? Almost none. There's almost no vitamins after all the refining in the seed oils. People like to say that they're a great source of vitamin E, but it's not all the vitamin E that was in the seed. A lot of it's gone from the refining, and the phytonutrients are gone. Very, very important chemicals that will stabilize the oil and prevent it from deteriorating into toxic compounds. Those are removed during the refining. So most of our food is really empty calories and that have no flavor. I mean, sugar all by itself is not delicious, right?
Mm.
Who wants to chow down on a pile of sugar? You might be a candy holic or a cookie holic or a chocoholic, but I don't think you've ever sat down to a pile of granulated sugar. There's no flavor.
No, it's like eating salt, straight salt. It's like, yeah,
Who would do that?
no.
And the same thing with flour, right? Like bread is delicious, but just plain old flour, no, it's not. So these main ingredients need chemicals in order to taste good. And that's why we are adding flavor chemicals to make this crap that we're eating taste like something that is actually food. When you think about it, these are famine foods, right? Like the other thing I didn't touch on is just like the white rice, very bereft of nutrients. That's another famine food. That's something that we ship to people who are literally going to starve to death if they don't get this stuff. Well, that's composing the bulk of the Americans' calories.
Wow.
These famine foods that the only reason we think that we have this great choice in our food supply is because of the food scientists who have created this mirage of different shapes, different textures, different colors, and different flavors. And that's why we have all these coloring agents. And sure, some of them are different in America than they are in Canada. But I guarantee that, once they do more research on this, they're going to find that the coloring agents that right now are linked to all these diseases, the reason they're linked to all these diseases is not that the agents themselves have any great toxicity. And this is really important. It's an association. When people are eating more of these coloring agents, they're eating more of the empty calorie carbohydrates, the refined flours, the refined sugars, and the outright toxic oils. There's, any processed food you can name, 80% of them are going to be made with seed oils. So seed oils are in most of these foods that have these fake colors that are so bad for us, that we think the coloring agents are doing the damage. But the reason I call dark calories is that no one has been really seriously investigating the role of seed oils in causing the diseases. People have said, sure, they oxidize, sure, they create toxicity, but there hasn't been a lot of talk about how they promote disease specifically. And that's what I stuck into all of my books. I show you all the science, all the references, and make the link between, I think it's been seed oils all this time where we've been blaming a lot of other stuff. And sure, that other stuff isn't so great, but it doesn't have the capacity to do the damage that the seed oils do.
And have you seen anything where if you were to remove the seed oils, like let's say someone who's gluten intolerant or even celiacs, and if you remove the seed oils entirely from their nutritional profile, let's say for a time span of a year, and then reintroduce gluten, do they still have the same response, or have you seen anything like that? It'd be kind of interesting to do some.
I have seen it, and the answer is no. They do not have the same response.
Oh, I thought you meant no. I haven't seen it. No.
Yeah.
Okay, so explain that. That's fascinating.
Sorry, I kind of cut you off while you were still talking. So seed oils promote inflammation in the gut, and almost everybody has some degree of gut inflammation if they're eating seed oils. Now, different people have the ability to control that inflammation either really well, so they don't feel it so bad, or not so well. So a lot of people don't feel a lot of gut symptoms until the inflammation has had a greater complication, a downstream effect. And in the case of celiac disease, there's been probably silent or not silent. Maybe people had stomach pains all their lives. Maybe they weren't, truly celiac until they were diagnosed with it, until their 20s or 30s or whatever. But there was inflammation before the celiac.
Mm.
And this is my hypothesis anyway, that there was inflammation before the celiac disease. And what happens is chronic inflammation in the gut just absolutely makes it impossible for the immune system in the gut to tell the difference between food and pathogens. So what does it do? It starts making mistakes. It thinks food, like wheat, is a pathogen, and it starts bringing about inflammatory responses in your gut when you eat wheat.
Wow. And that's that molecular mimicry that shows up. And it's not just wheat, but we see it in dairy, with casein and other foods. And
it's the immune system not being able to distinguish between similar molecules. And I guess that is the right. I haven't thought about that as molecular mimicry. I really have thought of it as like similar molecules that a healthy immune system can distinguish.
Yeah.
But a chronically inflamed immune system probably has a hard time. So that's why people develop food allergies, not just gluten, but, soy, eggs, fish, dairy. This is my hypothesis. And I've discussed this in several of my books. But that's what I mean by root cause. You see, like the root cause of food intolerances, I think, has to be gut inflammation. And what's driving that? Well, a crappy diet. And the worst thing in the diet is the seed oils. The second worst thing is the refined flours and the refined sugars. And both of those combine forces to make it impossible for our immune system to function properly, or really for any system in our body. But different people have different abilities to adapt in each different system, right?
And this is interesting because just this morning I was going through your book again, and I was like, man, and I know you've worked with some high profile professional athletes. One of my favorite running backs, Marshawn Lynch, he would score a touchdown and have Skittles there because his mom used to give him Skittles when he'd score a touchdown. And I'm just like, oh no, please don't eat those. But then you see him at McDonald's, and I have some professional athletes that I've worked with over the years, and the foods are just insane what they're eating. But you've been able to go into professional teams like the Lakers, I believe, and just completely change things. So how do you approach it? What was the first thing you did when you started working with these young athletes who are used to eating pretty crappy food?
The first thing I did was I worked with their chef. So the Lakers were lucky that they had a chef. Not every team has a chef in their training facility, but they go to the training facility and they eat there more than anywhere else other than their house. So the Lakers hired a chef because of Gary Vitti. Gary Vitti is an NBA legend who has since retired, but he was with the Lakers for, I think, over 30 years. And, he took his job seriously as the head trainer and trying to fortify everybody's health. Now, he, like everyone else, thought that a healthy meal for athletes would be egg white omelets and boneless, skinless chicken breast and broccoli with no salt or butter on it. And so their chef had kind of been hemmed in, I guess. And she is this amazing woman. Her name is Sandra Padilla. So shout out to Sandra. I wish she was still with them. They had a major management turnover and she's no longer there. But Sandra Padilla was one of 9 daughters in a family of Mexicans from Sonora, Mexico, who were deeply committed to their family food traditions. And she grew up in the kitchen, and working for the Lakers, she just felt hemmed in by the dietitian rules. And so when I sent her my book, my deep nutrition book and she read it, she was like, hallelujah. Like, this is like, yeah, this is what I've been wanting to do. I've been wanting to give them bone broths. I've been wanting to use butter. It tastes better. I've been wanting to use the egg yolks. All of the things that Weston Price talks about, that like any traditional cookbook will recommend using, right? This is just the way people used to eat. But she had grown up in this kind of time capsule into the past because her parents were literally from Sonora, Mexico, barely spoke English, and were just, able to continue those traditions. Even though they lived in Southern California, when they wanted to have a party, they would buy a pig 9 months ahead of time so they could feed the pig and get the pig to taste the way they wanted.
Wow. I love
So,
that.
so in working with the chef, what we did was we made the food at the training facility delicious.
Yeah.
They had no real idea for the longest time what was going on. First step was we made the food delicious.
Yep.
And then we started putting up little educational posters about like what we were doing, getting grass-fed stuff and getting healthy, healthy fats, and kind of deprogramming them a little bit with propaganda, the good kind of propaganda.
Yep.
And not all of them bought into it at all, but Steve Nash did, of course, Kobe did. After a serious intervention, Dwight Howard did, Pau Gasol did. A lot of the athletes that were of a mindset to make a connection between what they ate and their health.
Man. Well, how powerful is that? And before we move on, maybe we could define the Hateful Eight. I'm hoping people have already Googled it by now, but if we can go through those just a little bit, because I think what I would recommend to each one of you who are listening to this is just start looking at your label, and you'll be shocked at how frequently you see the Hateful Eight in your in any foods that are packaged. You're going to find these ingredients. But do you have them memorized? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd imagine you do.
Oh yeah, I got that one. I got you.
Okay.
So the Hateful Eight, there's 3 C's: corn, canola, cottonseed; 3 S's: soy, sunflower, safflower; and then there's rice bran and grape seeds kind of dangling at the end, sort of like the sometimes Y and the vowels that you had to memorize as a kid. So those Hateful Eight, you have to memorize them because there's no real perfect term to describe the oils that are the toxic ones. And I just want to elaborate on that a little bit. Like, when I first started writing about this, I used the term vegetable oil because that's the industry term. That's what you see on a label, like vegetable oil. You'll see may contain one or more of the following, right? The words will be vegetable oil and it'll say may contain one or more of the following. And it'll be corn, canola, cottonseed, one of the Hateful Eight. It will never be olive oil. You will never see that after the term vegetable oil may contain one or more of the following. But olive oil is a vegetable oil, right? So vegetable oil is clearly not the right term to use to tell people what to watch out for. So this newer term came around shortly after I wrote my first book. Rob Wolf coined a term called seed oil because soy and corn and cottonseed and so on are seeds.
Yeah.
So that's a popular term, but it's not perfect either because sesame seed oil is perfectly healthy. And we can go into why if you're curious, but the bottom line is you do have to memorize those Hateful Eight because they are the ones to watch out for. And there's a lot of thought that went into choosing those 8. And I cover some of that in my books for people who want to know. But it's not like I just picked them up out of thin air. I considered, how they were, how long they've been cultivated, whether the crude oil is edible or not. And of course, the amount of the fragile and potentially dangerous fatty acids that we call polyunsaturated fatty acids. Those are the reasons that some of the seed oils are toxic because most seed oils are high in polyunsaturated fatty acids. And when you treat them the way they do in the refining, in the process of making soy, corn, canola, the Hateful Eight, you absolutely destroy the ability of those polyunsaturated fatty acids to remain in the configuration that nature put them. They start to oxidize, and that mutates them, and the mutated molecules are toxins. So that's why the Hateful Eight are the bad ones. Peanut oil is not on that list. A lot of people who who are in this kind of space, they will list peanut oil, but they just have used a different, more arbitrary process. I think they're just looking at the fatty acid profile, but that's not all there is to it. There's more to know. So I was going to make one more point, but I can't remember what it was. Anyway.
Well, and I think that I like in your book, and I definitely recommend you guys, if you haven't gotten it already, go get Dark Calories, Deep Nutrition, the Fat Fix, Fat Burn Fix,
visual
gorgeous, and pick it up, because you'll learn so much, not only as far as like what you can do, but I love it how Dr. Cate, you're talking about when I cook food that's like more Asian based, and then I want to use some peanut oil and then some sesame oil, and then the way you describe it, as far as the stability of the molecule and the nutritional profile, it makes a lot of sense. Like, it's not like, I don't feel like it's a book where you're trying to push an agenda. And the majority, 95% of books on health, there's a slant that's there, and it's pretty easy to isolate. And the thing I love about what you've done too is what got me freed out from the conventional medical model. Well, first of all, I was sick, but I also had one of my teachers in the history of medicine. He's like, hey, look, and he went through medical school. He was a PhD, MD, Dr. Bauman. He was phenomenal, but he said, being a medical doctor is like being a carpenter. They're going to give you a very specific blueprint, and you have to follow the blueprint. Otherwise, the house is going to fall down and you're going to get fired. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you diagnose and you give the drug, and that's what it's going to be. And because I was asking questions that were outside of the box at the time and got really into nutrition. I got into veganism, and that was the worst health of my life. And that's when someone introduced me to Weston Price. And I was like, oh, this makes perfect sense, because I grew up on a cattle ranch. So,
Weston Price is the antidote to a lot of people's little dabblings with veganism. That's for sure. Because his book is a great book. And, I just learned so much from that. And, he totally, I think that book should be a required reading for every pre-med student, right?
Yes.
I've updated it with Deep Nutrition.
Yes, I think it needs to be, Deep Nutrition, Weston Price, read his work, and then jump into Dark Calories. So Dark Calories, the interesting thing that you've done with this is you've also given a blueprint of what people can eat. And we focus a lot on the can'ts and the dangers. And if you guys need any more compelling evidence, then just eat fast food every day for like a week and see how you feel. Like, it will be there, but maybe we could kind of talk a little bit about how you look at food and how you eat, because it's not nearly as restrictive as people probably are perceiving it to be.
Yeah. So when I first started this, I bumped into, in around 2010, I bumped into the paleo movement. And is that something you're familiar with?
Absolutely. I was into CrossFit and all of that. And I did paleo for a long time.
Yeah. And so in paleo, though, that's anti-dairy and anti-gluten, right? Mm-hmm. And, I felt that didn't make sense because, first of all, Weston Price wasn't anti-dairy. And people throughout Europe throughout the world, had been living on wheat-based foods for thousands of years before we had all these chronic diseases. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me either as a root cause of chronic disease. And so I just kept running into like different camps that were saying what you couldn't eat. I was saying you could eat everything that is actual food, right? I think you can eat dairy. I think you can eat like anything that comes from a cow, anything that comes from a pig, anything that comes
Yes.
from any part of any animal, any fish or fowl or moving creature. People who the folks who came to America, the early explorers, when they encountered the Native Americans, there was so much diversity and abundance in this amazing country that
Oh,
we live in here. That Indians, Native Americans in Virginia, like the way the conversation around breakfast would go would be like, "Well, what do you want?" That's what the host, the Native Americans, would ask. I forget which tribe, or I'd mention it. um, and then the white men that came from England would say, "Well, gee, I haven't. I heard the turtle was good, and I never tasted bear." And another guy would say, "Well, I could use some fish." And literally, they would come back with the order in about 2 hours. It just wasn't a problem,
geez,
and that was the food for the entire day. Like we
man.
we think that people who don't have modern conveniences we call them like subsistence farmers, like that they were barely getting by. But at least the way it was done in North America, this was a land of abundance. And these were people who knew the land, they knew how to work with nature. And we had such diversity. And I'm bringing this up to answer the question. There's literally no plant or animal that people have eaten in the past, right? That's the key when it comes to plants,
Yep.
that we can't eat. Now, plants and animals are different. Obviously, there's very few animals that are poisonous. There are some. And again, the native people that like live on coral reefs where there are killer puffer fish that you could choose, they know the difference, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
so they don't eat those killer puffer fish. They know how to tell the difference. Well,
Can
native
I ask
people
a
also,
question
oh yeah.
real quick? I've wanted to see if anyone could validate this. I heard a presentation like 25 years ago, and what the presenter was sharing is that there were more bison on the Great Plains. You know how we got rid of all the bison and then we put farms in, and that the quantity of bison would essentially equal the amount of cattle that we had in the United States at the time. Do you know if that's factual? I haven't been able to find anything on that.
Yeah, I heard that too. And I tried to dig down into it and I wasn't able to go anywhere with that. But since we're on the subject, I would argue that the edible biodiversity was at least what we produce now, if
Right.
not greater, because
Yes.
the Native Americans were working with nature. They weren't just eating bison. There were all kinds of animals, and
Totally.
there were turtles, there were snakes, there were squirrels, there were rabbits, there were birds of all sorts. I mean, there was just this huge abundance that
Yeah.
the Native Americans, because they worked with nature, they cultivated it. We've read about prescribed burns, and they chose, the reason that we have oak forests is possibly because Native Americans were dispersing acorns all throughout the country. So there was a lot of work that they did that we just can't even imagine. But
Mm.
so yeah, so I think that there's potential for returning to that. I don't know how much land is left. Like that's the problem now. There's a lot of people living on a lot of that land, but if we don't even try, we're never going to find out. So I think we should try. It's worth a try. But getting back to the question of what can we eat, I covered animals, I think, pretty well. So vegetables, we don't want to eat vegetables that are poisonous, and neither did our ancestors. And that's why we now have non-poisonous vegetables like broccoli and cabbage and Brussels sprouts and kale and carrots and on, onions, garlic, all the spices, right? So there's a lot of folks who are worried that all plants have anti-nutrients or they have toxins and we shouldn't eat them and that we should be pure carnivores. I
Yeah.
disagree with that because that's not what the historical record shows. Again, Weston Price and just common sense cookbooks, right? Cookbooks from the pre-World War II era will tell you all the different things you can eat. There's so much in there. There's every kind of vegetable that you can imagine. People had their own gardens. There was more diversity then than there is now in our grocery stores.
Wow.
So, why worry about food with a track record of nourishing people, that
Mm,
food with a track record of creating healthy people who did not have chronic diseases, who did not
yes.
die early of obesity or diabetes or cancer or complications of autoimmune disorders or kidney failure, all these things that people are dying of now prematurely, right? So
Yeah.
why worry about that? Let's just enjoy everything that nature produces and appreciate the wisdom of our ancestors who bred these wonderful plants for us, and just figure out how to cook them in a way that you like. And I have some recipes about things that I like in the back of my books.
She does. And I do like the tips on meat. Cook the meat nice and slow. Don't, the hotter you cook things, the more you kill the nutrients. So anyway, you're such a wealth of knowledge and resources, and it's so fun to not only read your book, but also be able to talk to you in person here. And I really appreciate your time. And so if you don't mind, I'll ask you a couple rapid fire questions just as we finish up here. We're coming up to an era where I think we have a windows open where we could make a big difference in health in America. And you and I spoke before the show started about the opportunities that exist. If you had two or three things that policies you could put in and that would make the biggest impact for the health of, not just our kids, but for humans living today, what would those policies be?
Well, I would say we have to absolutely revise the nutrition curriculum for medical doctors, dietitians, and so on, sports nutritionists, everybody with a license. That curriculum is creating the chronic disease epidemic, and we need to rewrite it in the name of science. Right now, it's written in the name of the processed food industry,
Yeah.
because that's who influenced the American Heart Association, and that's who was paying for Ansel Keys to deliver his deadly message of don't eat butter, don't eat saturated fat, eat vegetable oils.
Right. Yeah. Second question is, if you look at the future of your work, what's the next book? What's the next project you're working on?
Well, I think what I need to do is move more into academia, because what has happened is I tried to get this message out directly to the consumer. And it's helped, millions of people. Like, people now understand seed oils are toxic. But we still have billions of people around the world who are being basically force-fed seed oils because that's what's in the food supply. So there's a lot more work to be done. And I think that in order to get credibility and not just be seen as an influencer, I need to do more publishing in academic journals. Because, I think that basically, I say this a lot and I really mean it, and it sounds a little crazy. We don't need more research. We need better food.
Yeah.
So I just need to convince doctors of that. And that's what I think I need to do. Like, all of my books have been kind of, I do a lot of scientific referencing. They've been aimed towards like the influencer, and I have influenced a lot of doctors in this space. I mean, I think all the keto doctors, if they haven't read my books directly, they they are avoiding seed oils because they've listened to people who did read my books directly.
Yeah.
So, but it needs to be more formalized. I think it needs to be more less something that can be. Right now, we're having this whole conversation about health in the public forum, right? And we're counting on the media to educate people properly. I get interviewed all the time. I was just interviewed today by somebody who I know is going to interview somebody from the opposite side saying, oh, seed oils are just fine. And the reader of her, this is somebody from the Atlantic, the Atlantic readers are just going to come away with thinking, well, nobody knows. It's confusing. I'm not going to change anything.
Right.
Right. So right now, this conversation is taking place in public forums. This conversation is highly scientific.
Right.
It's all
Yeah.
about the science, details of what is a polyunsaturated fat, what does oxidation mean, what is oxidative stress. That's something that shouldn't be like the validity of that as a root cause should not be adjudicated in the court of public opinion. That should be something that's discussed in academic medicine. I'm not in academic medicine, so I need to break in there somehow, and the only way I can imagine to do it is to start publishing in academic journals.
Man. And the final question is, if you look at the pharmaceutical companies right now, and you do call them out, especially with cholesterol. I was shocked at some of the things I learned there, but what would you do differently, or what would you advise people to do when it comes to some of the prescriptions their doctors are prescribing, and how would you recommend they advocate for themselves?
Yeah, so there's a chapter in Dark Calories where I focus on cholesterol. It's all about cholesterol. And
So
point out that cholesterol is a nutrient. People are blown away by the fact that doctors are taught that it's toxic when it is actually a nutrient. And that means that doctors have absolutely no clue what they're talking about when it comes to heart disease, when it comes to the idea that lowering cholesterol is a good idea. It is not. It's a terrible idea. People who have lower cholesterol are universally sicker across the board and die sooner of horrible things, dementia, infectious diseases, and cancer. And people who have higher cholesterol live longer. So do we need to take a statin? No.
Thank you. I'm so glad I asked that question. Well, man, Dr. Shanahan, I'm looking forward to seeing the major shift that's going to happen. I've talked about transforming healthcare, and I've always seen it through the eyes of healthcare entrepreneurs, is what I've called. I've got a group called Go Wellness, and it's like we've got to be entrepreneurial because we've had to, you've plowed your own fields essentially. You've had to do it all on your own because there's been no road paved. I mean, you've been able to stand on the shoulders of people like Weston A. Price, but at the same time, the landscape has changed so dramatically, and you're a voice of reason. And I look at my kids, my hopefully future grandkids and great grandkids. I'm like, if we could all just follow the principles a little more and change the farming infrastructure, man, we could go back to this land of abundance that we're here. Let's do it. So thanks so much. Any final words that you'd like to share? Anything I should have asked you that you're interested in sharing?
Well, I guess I'll just share this little insight into my past political life, which there isn't much of it. But when Trump was first elected and he said, "Make America great again," I did a tweet about the way to make America great again is to make America's farms great again. And that means changing everything about the way we create our food. And I was really, really hopeful that he would do that in his first term, but he didn't. So that was very disappointing. But then when, now with what's going on, it's like, yeah, this is my dream come true.
Yeah, I think he has to be serious about it. RFK is not joking around. RFK sued him twice in the past, and they're now they've got a mission. So I think it's perfect for work like yours. I do appreciate the academic side of what you're doing for someone like me who loves reading that. And I agree that you're going to make a big impact there. But I also think that there's probably a place for you being up there, writing some policy, thinking about some things, because history better than probably anyone else I've ever spoken to. And the context is what makes it well, it's the context of history that actually where you can start to see things so clearly. And your articulation of it is just magical. So thank you for taking the time. I'm honored to have you on the show. And best way for people to reach out to you, what would that be? Follow
Please
you.
visit. What's that?
Follow you where, I guess I should say.
Well, start with my website. Please come to drcate.com, which is drcate.com. And at the top, I have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. And when you do, you get a bunch of free resources that tell you a little bit about how to, implement some of the changes that I recommend everybody to make. But I'm also on Twitter, and it's at Dr. Cate, Cate, Shanahan, at Dr. Cate Shanahan on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook with the same handle. and LinkedIn too.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And for those of you who love the show, make sure you share it with your local politician. We'll talk to you guys later.